Then without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two facilitators today, Jason Cassidy of Shinydocs Corporation and David McDermott of ARMA Consulting LLC. And with that, I'll turn it over to you guys to kick us off.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I'm Jason Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Shinydocs Corporation. Please come see us at the booth when you have a chance and tell you all about the company there, and we'll take your time with that. I would like to mention how I met David. We had a customer that in common. Well, David is my customer, and we went in there on a number of compliance-related questions and issues about content. The client has tens of thousands of users and hundreds of terabytes of data, and it becomes quite, as a manufacturing company, it becomes quite a nightmare when that information isn't explicitly tied to the assets that they're supposed to be managing. And it becomes quite of a nightmare when you can't support your litigation because you can't find the information. And every time you go to find the information, you find more. So that's a problem. So we engaged together on a couple of fronts. But the most significant thing that we did was 716 terabytes of data analysis in 2 days to identify where and what the data was across 1,200 file shares. And then layered on duplication detection, and then layered on classification of that content in place. And it was really powerful because when I met with David being the past president of ARMA, we're allowed to say that word here. And he taught us a lot about the day-to-day changes with respect to legal citations, how 200 laws change per month, and how to layer that on top of an information management practice. And it was something that when we married that data understanding across 280 million files, and doing it with David's knowledge of how the law applies to this and internal process, it was a very powerful combination, which I believe was something that maybe couldn't have been done before, not without hundreds of people, and we did it all with machines. So thank you, David, for introducing us to that, and I'll let you speak to yourself.
Oh, thanks. So, yes, I was president and chairman of the board of ARMA International. I was on that board for many, many years. I grew up in the records management world. Been doing this since I was 9, we'll just leave it at that. So, over 40 years. Met some great folks, also president and chairman of the board of the Institute of Certified Record Managers. What I've learned through all of this process is we need all of us to accomplish getting control and doing this. How many people, I love to ask questions because I'm the shy guy because I like other people to talk. How many people have embarked on doing a content cleanup, data analytics, and dispositioning of their content, structured or unstructured? Was it easy?
No.
Why was it not easy?
Data is everywhere.
Too much data.
Data is everywhere. It's not easy because of us, people, right? So what I've learned over time is if you're going to do these kind of projects, you need to bring the people in. How many have read the book From Good to Great? Nobody? The book From Good to Great talks about getting the people on the bus, getting the right people on the bus. But it's just not about getting us on the bus. It's about getting the right people in the right seat on that bus. So for us, for me in my business, and I was a practitioner for 30 years before I became a consultant. So I come at it from a different angle. I come at it from the user angle and the people that don't want to get rid of anything, to people like me who have sat through way too many depositions and want to get rid of everything that I don't need. I want to get rid of the draft copies, the versions, those things. We did a project, I did a project manually 2 years ago. And I still have scars, you want to see? People don't have time to do this. So I always tell people the ability to create content has outstripped our ability to manage it. Everybody buy that?
Yeah.
I did a project, we started at another company, they had 1 terabyte of content. By the time we launched, they had 7 terabyte. Small company, small project. But the ability to create content is outstripping our ability to manage it. So, just want to lay that out. Without tools like Cognitive, Shinydocs, others that are out there, that we just won't get on top of them.
So, how many people here know exactly how much information that their organizations have?
Yeah, right. That's a joke, right?
Yes, of course. It's leading questions. Yes, and that's a pretty common theme when we start talking to organizations. We'll say, well, how much is in your OpenText? How much is in your SharePoint? And generally, you have a pretty good sense of that. We got 5 million records in OpenText, and we got 3 million records in SharePoint, and you do that kind of analysis. Okay, how much is in file shares in email? And that's where the shrug happens. And you can say something like, I know that we own 200 terabytes of disk, and those are the types of responses that we get. So the first thing that I found to be quite useful is to just generate a map of this content for the customer. The visualization of here's your content creation curve. And a content creation curve for a customer always looks like this. I'm going to put like the year 1997 here. Okay, and this would be the year somewhere around 2010, and this would be somewhere around now. And the content creation curve usually looks like this. Well, they acquired a company, and we acquired another company. We did big bulky import, and then this off to infinity and beyond. So for those of you who can't see that, that's the content creation curve for each of the customers that we crawl. Would people agree that you're probably like this with your organizations? So going to point number 2, it is, so that let's say that there's a slope line here. We'll take the first derivative and say that looks something like that. The idea might be just to reduce the slope of that content, whatever you can do to reduce the slope of the content. So by first understanding what you have and how much you have, that is literally just getting to the start line. It's not finishing it, but it gives you the idea that maybe this is something worth investing in. Because I know, I am familiar with the largest ECM implementation in the United States, and they jokingly say if we keep pulling in information at this rate, 100% of our budget will be on disk very shortly. And obviously it's ridiculous to bring in millions of email records a day and millions of document records a day, but I mean that's the practical reality is we can't keep this stuff forever and we can't get rid of it until we know what it is. So I'll quickly talk about a maturity curve that we try to plot with customers, and I'd like to see where people say that they are. So I'll save the label for this spot here, and I'm going to put line, and then this is a destination. Yeah, esoteric destination that I'm going to put over here is full automation. I'm just going to put A. And over here I'm going to put chaos. Okay? What's interesting is when I ask customers like yourself, okay, where would you put yourself with respect to your ability to manage data? Quite often people put themselves quite high. Let's say that this is 100% up here and change the scale. It's not automation, it's management. Quite often people say, well, I manage all the important records and I'm doing a pretty good job of that. But then I ask, well, how much of that is automated and how much of it is manual that people have to do it themselves, or you have to have a librarian at the end of a project go in and put it in the right place? And unfortunately, being able to manage data and having like a nice search on it, it's only nudges that line up a little bit. How many people would self-select themselves somewhere close to chaos with respect to automation alone? That the computers are, you have to do everything, the computers aren't doing everything for you. Cool. I'm going to show you where there's a partner of ours that you've heard of before, nice people, they're called IBM, and they invented this thing called Watson, and they wanted to take people right here, right away. This is the data understands itself. I'll put it in data understands itself, DUI. Okay, and the problem with that is they tried to build a financial services model that would come in and do AI for financial services, and they tried to build a medical model that would come in and do like predictive healthcare analysis so that we didn't need people to read x-rays anymore and stuff like that. And the problem is it never worked. across organizations. So then they bought Red Hat and started doing something else. My apologies, no, I'm here, we love you, and let's keep working together. But that was the problem that they encountered. They skipped over an important step. So there's a let's introduce some automated workflow step here, but even before that, there is the understand. What do you got? What do you actually have? So that's where we build all of our tooling, is not to try to give you that esoteric goal of full automation right away. It is, let's just use some artificial intelligence, some natural language, some pattern matching, and old historical easy ways of doing this, all combined together with massively scalable search in order to just understand what you have. And then, once you understand what you have, now you can possibly move your way up this maturity curve. Now I know what I have. Let's get rid of 50% of it as redundant, obsolete, and trivial. Let's then positively identify the records, and then spend the rest of the time figuring out the other. So, and I'll pass it over to David, because David has lived this with us for the last year.
Yeah, so part of the challenge when I talk about people, we're a group of convenience. Would you buy that? We do what's convenient. In the paper world, when you ran out of space in those cabinets, what'd you do?
Buy another cabinet.
Send it off to Iron Mountain. Access, right? Because it went inactive or semi-active. In the data world, and we use data, just like my old man used to say, let's go Honda riding. You know, we're on a motorcycle, but he centered it on the Honda, but it's data, right? So, if you focus on the universe, you get mired down and try and be perfect over practical. That makes sense to everybody? So, understanding what it is you have will allow you to build your tool to get up here. How many are litigated organizations? How many have litigation going on? I work for a company that had 300 to 400 litigations going at any given time that all require some level of discovery, and that was my job. I did a deposition, and the plaintiff's attorney asked me, he goes, Mr. McDermott, he goes, are you aware, or do you know the manager of this hydroelectric dam that we own? I said, yeah. Dave Hawk, he's a great guy. Does he follow your policies? Well, yeah, we've given you your policies, because I'm a real policy guy. I don't get stuck in policies, but I am a policy guy, and I try to set rules that are practical. And I said, well, yeah, sure, here's all the process, here's the destruction, here's the deletion stuff that he does. He goes, oh, that's really good. He goes, are you aware before he deletes his content, he photocopies it or prints it and takes it home? My attorney sitting beside me, and he goes, are you going to answer? And I said, no, we're not. We went to his house and he had boxes of what I call workers' comp boxes, big transfer cases. We found one document in there that's been deleted according to policy, but printed. And the company said, how much do you want? And they wrote a check for $1 million. One document should have been destroyed 4 years early according to policy. So what Jason's talking about here, if you don't know what you have, how can you manage it? How can you delete it? How can you disposition it in order to get back to here? And I'm a real, well, I'm not so lean anymore, but I really try to get to the minimal amount required. So what we're discovering in this project is how many draft copies and how many versions that we're finding, how many temporary internet files. It's crazy. But until you do this with the tool, you're not going to know what you have. And unfortunately, if you don't do this, guess when you're going to find out what you have? Not pretty. We did, not me, a group of ours did similar manually. And they found one person who had every Disney movie on his membership. That's pretty cool. We deleted it. A couple weeks later, ran the tool, went back and did it. They were back. So what we learned in this process is not, when you're doing this, you don't think in a vacuum, back of the bus. who do you need on the bus? And what we found was he was calling up the help desk, restoring all those videos each time. So then the question became, what do you do? Right? So it is really about finding out what it is that you don't know. How many people know what ROI means? What's it mean? Reduction of incarceration. How many people went to accounting classes? College, I did. What's the inventory terms? First in, first out, FIFO? Last in, first out? Right? LIFO? So many organizations operate what we call the fish method. You know what the fish method is? First in, still here. So if you don't do this, and you look at how fast content is being created, received, how many people do Google-less searches, and it's like, oh my God, that took me forever to find that document. I'm just going to save it to my network share. It's not a record. It's information, but it clogs everything up. Without doing these things, you don't find that. So I'm a big believer in this. I did a big project like this for Blue Cross. Wow. You find a lot of stuff, and it's not just about the content, but we're also looking for PII, things that shouldn't be on somebody's network share. California's privacy law is going to go into effect, what, in another 6 months? 8 months?
No, it's in January.
Is it already in place? GDPR? We don't have the tools or the capacity to do it on our own, so that's why, and I'm not just talking cognitive, because I am a consultant and I work with other companies as well, but this is crazy, guys, and like I said, it's the ability to create content has outstripped our ability to manage.
Can I ask, so I want to give some hints as to some ideas to add the structure. So we haven't really gotten to adding the structure yet. And there's some tricks that we do that enable that. I alluded to previously that we use massively scalable search, that we understand where all the content is that's out there, but we don't have to put it in our bucket. Because probably a lot of people here have gone an undertaking of, we're going to bring in a new system, and then they spend the entire project just migrating stuff before they realize a lick of utility out of the product. Does that ever happen to anybody here?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we say is wherever it is, if it's in SharePoint, if it's on a file share, if it's in Exchange email, if it's in your open text system, wherever it is, understand where it is first, then think about actioning that content. It allows you to do a couple of things. Thing number one is the redundant, obsolete, and trivial analysis. So, as David had mentioned before, you can identify what a trivial file is. If I know the last modified date and I know it's a log file and we only need to keep log files for 2 years, let's delete all the log files that are older than 2 years. That's pretty easy. But because we have massively scalable search and I can find every word on every page without having to bring the stuff into my system, we can do some neat tricks. So if I could get people to rattle off some structured data systems, I'm going to start this list with like Maximo. All heard of that, and SAP, and what are some other systems? Great Plains. Anybody have any other structured systems that have a lot of information about how their business is run?
FileMaker. AIIM.
Yeah, PeopleSoft. Cool. And the list goes on. I know there's lots more, but people are being shy. That's fine. So. Okay, so in this, you might have a lot of your asset information in Maximo. You might have asset IDs and when things were last repaired and that type of information. That's great. SAP, you're going to have everything, customer information, vendors, all that. It's the same thing with Great Plains. PeopleSoft, you might have your human resources records. What's cool is I can get a list of every staff that's ever worked at my organization, right? I can get a list of every vendor that we've ever worked with. I can get a list of every asset ID, every job ID, every bill of materials ID. What if I take that list and overnight pre-calculate all the searches against this data? So I can find every document in the system that mentions this particular asset ID or this particular account number and create a connection between the structured data in that unstructured data. Every staff, where are they mentioned in each of these documents? Why don't you do these types of things? Well, you don't do it because you don't have massively scalable search and you haven't figured out where all your data is. That's the question. But maybe people could talk about that in your industry. I'm hoping for a volunteer here. How would it help your business? And I'll give an example of a customer that we work with right now. They do bill of materials for break fix. So a pump is having an extra vibration, they think it's an O-ring, and they go in and then they have to figure out, have we ordered this O-ring before? Do we have stock of it? Have we ever done a repair on a pump like this before? And the average search time is about 7 hours. Because they go into their open text system, their file share systems, and all those types of things. What did we do with them? We went into their, it's very similar to Maximal, into their asset management system. And all we did was we found every purchase order that mentioned this particular part that's in this pump. We found every bill of materials that mentioned it, and just put those IDs on the document for the search. So I can go in and say, I'm looking for this particular part number, and it'll show me every repair that's ever been done and all the drawings associated with it. So that reduced the bill of materials time from 7 hours down to 2, because they didn't have to search anymore to go find this information. So can you think of anybody give an example of where tying these records to the actual content that's out there on a file share might actually speed up your business? Anybody want to pull that idea? David, you want to take a stab at it? There you go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
thank you.
because that is frequently a problem that I have. My company is an architectural design firm, so they don't really put the project numbers on each and every document. But when they do, it's usually end up with multiple project numbers, so you have to search each file to find the right project number.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could search by that project number and just put just that data, that would speed up like 4 days worth of searching. As, you know, of looking through countless files trying to find the right folder somewhere with what you're looking for.
And the cool thing about using AI is once you can find the ones, because some files will contain multiple project numbers, but you can start training models on what it means to actually be the de facto project number, because you've already identified this is definitely a project number within this document. And with human intervention, you say, well, this is typically where the actual project number is being used, and you give that examples to your model, and that type of things built into our platform, the Microsoft Cortex platform, lots of things like that. And what's cool is the computer will then start guessing and saying, this is the actual project number, and so let's create a separate insight for that I can search and say, find me based upon this de facto project number, not just a full text search across it, which really narrows that down.
Yeah.
And that's why Google, we all love Google, is way better than all of us at searching, because they're doing this work nonstop on all of our data that's public. Everything that's in our LinkedIn profiles, everything that's on our websites, all the restaurant information. They search it, they augment it. I got an app on my device here. Well, they pay me 20 cents every time I confirm that the restaurant that I just ate at has an accessible washroom, and that, like, they are augmenting and they're using AI to continually crawl this information. And then as information professionals, you have your staff saying, well, how come our search isn't as good as the Google search? And the reality is that we haven't done the extra work to continually enrich the data so that we know the temporal information, we know the time-based information about this, we know the geolocation information. All that stuff's in our data. I think we all agree, there's probably geolocation data in tons of the stuff that we have right now. Have we bothered to crawl it and find that and put all the documents on a heat map showing that all the documents relate to this particular assets in this area? No, we probably haven't done that. Should we? Well, if we want Google-like search for our content inside of our organization, then we probably should.
So, quick question, how many people have retention schedules in here? Are they functional schedules, department schedules?
Bucket schedules.
Big bucket?
Functional.
But using a big bucket process? No? How many record categories on your schedule?
135.
That's great. That's wonderful if you can do that. How big a company, Tom?
About 21,000 people.
21,000. I did a project once where the company had 1,800.
Oh my gosh.
Do you think a schedule and a classification process with that many categories can work in an electronic environment? So it's really your base start position, your policy, your retention schedules, look at it, make sure it works. We did with our purchasing group, and we tried to whittle that down, and when we asked them to verify some of our validation and doing all the stuff we did, they go, oh my God, we have way too many categories. And like that, we whittled that down from like 28 categories down to 7 for them. So all of a sudden they could start looking at it holistically and start managing and classifying on a quicker basis, especially with the tools that we give them. So if you have processes in place that are not practical, your people won't get involved.
So you developed a retention schedule for them that had 7 classification codes. So you just asked us what our schedule is based on, functional area or et cetera. What was that one based on?
Function, subfunction. So we have I believe 13 functions and then multiple subs underneath that. I do have another organization operates in 10 countries, and they have also, I think, 13 functions, manufacturer, and they only have 158 categories. So, very manageable.
Yeah, and the understanding, one thing that I found, and this hasn't been popular with records managers, in that like dealing with file plans and dealing with different classifications of content, quite often the file plan is created long before we know how much data it is or what data it is. And when we actually go and do the file understanding, we find that the information tends to cluster in particular areas, so they got some stuff really right. And then there's a ton of blanks or areas in the file plan that just have 1 or 2 hits in there. And I guess my point with that is not to call anybody out on anything, because you have to do that. You have to imagine the information that you have and then try to slot the information in there. But let's invert that and say, let's find out what we have first, and then build our file plan around the actual content. If we find that the clusters around and there's 50,000 records like this, then that's probably deserving of something by file plan. But if there's only 6, then maybe I should group that a little bit heavier with some other place in the organization. And I know for sure that we do that because it's always been in the absence of 100% knowledge of our content. But now I believe with the tools that are out there, not just ours, but there's other vendors out there that are doing this type of thing, that is an achievable goal. In fact, it's something that you can demand. One of the things that is right on the banner of our pavilion out there is get the C-suite's attention. Because how many people find that ideas don't make their way past your manager in an organization? Yeah, it's everybody's hands should be up. You guys are being shy. Okay.
So let me add to that. How many people in here have access to the C-suite? Not very many.
A couple.
Not very many.
So one thing that we found, David witnessed this firsthand, and I don't know why I'm flipping this over, it has nothing to do with this. But when we create a visualization of the content, and we say this is how much information that you have across different classifications and different areas of the business, this is your areas of risk, this is where you're out of compliance with your own retention policies, that is not an idea anymore. That makes it straight up to the board. And all of a sudden, it starts unlocking different tasks in the organization, and it starts to change the thinking in the organization. And sometimes it's not even I'm not going to say a good way or a bad way, but it's just in an unexpected way where we had a plan for a rollout of some type of ECM system, and we're going to do a bunch of things. And then when you see what the actual data is, the needle screeches off the record, and everybody then actually has to rethink the plan and say, okay, man, we're going to have to attack this differently. And I've seen that in a number of projects. When that information goes to the C-suite, now all of a sudden the records manager is in the driver's seat to be able to drive a behavior in the organization, whereas having the idea could never penetrate there before. Being armed with the data is very powerful.
Yes.
I have a question about how you convince people. Our problem isn't the data. We discovered that we had an enormous amount, we're a statistical agency, a lot of data. But what we discovered was we had a lot of people accessing that data, and they're all making copies. So we had files that had like 1,000 copy of the one file. We were using up server space like crazy. So they came up with a whole different way. We've migrated to a whole thing. Now there are versions. You don't have to take a copy. You don't have, but what hasn't happened is the culture hasn't changed. So now we've got this new system, and everybody, you don't have to make a copy of the file. You can just pull it from there, and it's all in one location. People are making copies of the files on this new thing. So now we're having multiple copies of the files on this new system that isn't supposed to have copies. You're supposed to just be able to link. How do you break people out of it? Sorry, am I being a little
Sometimes it's a big stick. Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
You're talking about people making copies. Are they sharing these?
What do you mean, well, not outside of our department?
But like with others that don't have access?
No.
Because one of the biggest challenges there with making copies is the most common use of for collaboration is email.
Yeah.
Which means that there's at least 5 times more copies than you think there are.
Then, yes, exactly. How many people in here have DLPs, data loss protection? Right? We're finding a lot of stuff that is getting out the doors that shouldn't be, and companies are actually starting to put DLP and surveillance processes in place to prevent that from happening. I work for an organization that we actually shut down USB drives. We shut down the ability to put anything on your C drive. We locked them down, and quite honestly, we locked them too tight. Because you can get so to the point of funneling people to a certain spot, then they can't do their jobs. How many people in here, did we answer? But the point is, change management is hard, right? My kids, you want to see a funny video, YouTube, go look, trying to remember, it's an iPad commercial about paper. And it is the funniest thing in the world. The guy's got his iPad, and his wife has got sticky notes. And he goes, Jane. And then she's working in her office, and she prints something, and he sticks his iPad in, Jane. And this goes on through this commercial. And then he's in the bathroom, and he reaches for the toilet paper, and there's no toilet paper. He goes, Jane, and she slides her iPad with My point is, we do need paper, but we have to control it. How many people in here would feel comfortable knowing they're working off the right version?
Oh, absolutely.
We've looked at deduping and going, this is where I'm not a 0 and 1 guy, so I try to stay out of those guys' way. But deduping and figuring out where all those absolute duplicates are. The challenge with what we're doing, and I've done this with other organizations, is trying to figure out, okay, who's going to have where's the original? Who's going to have access to it? How do you secure that? Who has rights? Who doesn't have rights? Right? But we do have a process. We developed, I've did this for a couple companies now, where, and I'm going to, how many people, records managers in here? Okay, I'm going to, one of the doors blocked, so I don't know, let me go over here. I don't think it's records management anymore. It's not, it hasn't been for years. I did a presentation about 18 years ago. I said it's retention management, not records management. But we try to drill into something to those records. But it's not the records that get us in trouble necessarily.
It's not throwing them away.
Not throwing them away, and it's all that work in process stuff that your boss comes in and says, hey, you know, can you do a spreadsheet for me? And can you do this and do that? And you do that. And then that content stays active on your network share for the rest of its life, unless somebody takes the time to go in there and delete that. So those are the challenges, but really it's change management and education and training and tools. I did a project where we gave everybody a business value folder. We call it business value folder. You had 90 days to move your content to a business value folder so we can ingest it. Because we don't want to ingest content from one system into another system. It's like cleaning your house and throwing all your crap in the garage. You didn't do anything, right? And we notified everybody weekly, communication. And the president of our food group division called me up on the 91st day and he goes, Dave, where's my stuff? And I said, well, Kevin, we deleted it. Because on the 91st day, we said anything not in those business value folders, gone. Board of directors support to do that. And you know what Kevin told me? He goes, wow, I didn't believe you would do it. And we did. He goes, can I get that back? Yes. I didn't tell him that. I said, well, Kevin, we could do it, but it's very costly, and it's going to take a big, serious effort to get it back. He goes, well, let me think about that. A couple days later, he called me up and he goes, you know what?
I need it.
I don't miss it. Right? So it's how you approach it and how you get those right people on the bus to make sure that what you're doing is something that your employees can get on board with. I call it getting in the sandbox together. We learned in the first grade kindergarten. What's the first rule you learn in kindergarten?
Share.
When you're in the sandbox, don't throw sand. Right? When you're doing these projects, you got to get the people on board and you got to educate and train. Yes.
Yeah. So I work for the nonprofit sector. And we have a lot of unstructured data in our shared drive. So I was wondering, in terms of leveraging tools to be able to understand the content we have in our server, what sort of low cost or low code solutions do you have for organizations with limited budgets, for example?
Yeah, so the first thing that we do, the low cost entry in one of the areas where we've been able to perform, and this is a pitch she asked for a pitch for the tool, so I'm going to do that. It's the crawl and the visualization is very inexpensive, and for not-for-profits, I'm sure we can find a good. Where's Lou? No, he's closing the deal. We can find a good price point for a not-for-profit that may be different than commercial organizations. It's very low barrier to entry to show you what you have. Because once you know what you have, then the follow-on work for us always happens. And so that initial visualization and understanding is very inexpensive. Mm-hmm. It's in the thousands of dollars rather than the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like it's very accessible. And I would encourage people to take us up on that. It's you will see how much you have. It's very easy to do and the software does all the work. But then you get to see that the work that's ahead of you, and we do have tools then to do the disposition in place. We can clean up the rot and all that and start actioning the data. But that initial visualization is very accessible because it is the machines that are doing that.
Just to point to what she was saying, sorry I don't know your name, but I'm finding with our immature organization and implementing some AIIM practices, it's about trust too. Mm-hmm. So it's really difficult, especially to take the C-suite and say, we're going to do this with all your email, and you're going to still be able to access the important stuff, and the C-suite is shaking in their boots. So some of them are still copying them or making PST files similar to going and copying something from, I'm assuming, your repository or your source of truth, and making files, because that's the way they did it forever, and they didn't have any faith or trust in the system. So allowing them to build that trust and faith in the system over a period of time and saying, you have this much time to understand how it works, and then we're going to blow everything else away.
I think something to go with all of what they've been saying is that part of it is not just change management, it's understanding that these are not your personal property or responsibility. The company is the owner and the responsible party, and that's where the start of that change.
Absolutely, Todd. That's a great point, because it is not your content. It is the company's content that's created on company tools. And believe me, if you send that stuff home and you get into a lawsuit and we find out that you send it home, guess what we're doing? We're knocking on that door and getting those banker's boxes, those transfer cases. So it's really not your stuff. at the end of the day.
You don't get the choice.
You don't get the choice.
And I believe that is, like, I'm a software guy, so I'll step aside from the cultural aspects of this. Like, I've talked to enough engineers who feel like they're drawing in what they've done with their draftspeople as their art, and that this was their legacy that they want to hang up on their wall in their billiards room. And so I get that, and culturally you'll have a battle associated with that. And that's why I just kind of fall back to the position of we have a fence around all this, so we know where all the bodies are buried in the backyard. And that's the best that we can do for now, and then you can work on that cultural piece. I can tell you every outbound email that has a contract attached to it that is not in your records management system. There's value there. You can show every spot where people have copied the stuff around the file shares. We have one customer that across 150 terabytes, they had 80% duplication, so it speaks exactly to what you're saying. I don't know how to fix that, but at least we can tell on them. So maybe that's...
As we're approaching the end of the session here, I was wondering, if there is one takeaway, one key thing that you want everybody in the room to walk away with. I was wondering if you could crystallize that point for us.
So for me, it is one thing, is that 10 years from now, we will not be manually doing a save as into the right file plan and then manually attributing any of the documents and then kicking off the approval workflow, all the stuff that we're doing today in order to make sure that we have a good records management practice. And we do have customers that have very pristine records management practices. It's a lot of heavy lifting, it's a lot of value, and they do it. But 10 years from now, I hope we agree that there'll be technology and cool tools that are doing all that for me. So as an engineer or as somebody working in the front office, I just click save and the document magically does what it needs to do, and David gets his records management piece or information management piece or disposal management, however we want to think of it. So now we got to ask, how did we get there? And work it all the way back to 10 years from then to today. What step did we take to today? I hope it is at least understand where all your data is and then start adding some automation. Because if you're a commercial business and your competitor starts doing this, and all of a sudden they have some AI engines that they never have to do anything manually ever again, and they're only working on their highest value tasks, and your company's doing it on paper in the old way, your company's going to be out of business very quickly. Because the way this technology builds on itself happens extremely quickly. So be a futurist, know that is coming, and then work it backwards to what can I do right now in order to take that first step towards that full automation of my organization.
Yeah, I've got a couple things. So first off, IT's the tools. We're the rules. You got to work together, get in the sandbox, play with each other. I'm also a golfer, and I took the golf lesson because my drive was just going nuts. I just hated it, right? Because I was just trying to hit it for everything I had. My pro said, "What are you aiming at?" And I go, "Out there. I just want to get the ball 250 yards." And he goes, "If you don't have a target, you have nothing to aim at." So my recommendation, go back to your organizations and figure out what that target is going to be. If you're going to flip your thing here, if you're going to try to get to here overnight, you've lost your target. Have a target. Know what that target's going to be.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Jason and David. Thank you guys.